Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Thanks for logging on despite the madness going on out there. My name is Westin Miller. I'm the Director of Public Policy with Civic Nebraska. Civic Nebraska is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. And our mission is that we are committed to creating a more modern and robust democracy for all Nebraskans. That takes on a couple different forms for us, but today I want to talk primarily about our voting rights initiatives. I'm our Director of Public Policy, which means that I'm our primary point of contact with lawmakers at the local, the state, and the federal level, but I work primarily with the state legislature. I conduct a lot of research. I oversee our coordinated legislative strategy. I monitor Civic Nebraska's compliance with nonprofit lobbying rules. I spend a lot of time with senators and their staff, helping them conduct research, answering constituent questions, and assisting those senators who do work on elections and voting rights policy with their legislative strategy, or sometimes opposing their initiatives, unfortunately. Um, I want to talk to you today about Civic Nebraska's voting rights portfolio. I'm not going to take a super long time, but I want to kind of give you an overview of some of the hot button voting rights issues that are happening in Nebraska. I know that there's been some interest from a few of you about things like voter suppression and gerrymandering, so we're going to cover all of that. I'm not going to do a lot of talking at you. I'm going to set you up with some materials that will explain our positions and also um, uh, connect with people who can articulate some of these positions in a much more entertaining way than I can. So, before we get started, there are two framing questions I want us to think about. Um, I've never had a presentation like this that's not in person and interactive. If I was doing this with you together, we'd spend most of today basically rewriting the voting rights section of the Constitution. And through discussing each of those components, we would learn about some of these issues and how they matter and why they aren't necessarily helpful for the average voter. Since we can't do that, I do want us to think about two questions before we get started. The first question is who gets to vote? Um, there have always been some kind of rules in place in our country about who's allowed to participate in the voting process. Um, One of the reasons that discussions about voting rights today can get so nasty, I mean, there's a lot of obviously nasty political and partisan elements that have always been present. But one of the reasons it's so hard to think about creatively is because we are just bogged down by so many assumptions about how voting ought to be or the way elections ought to work. It's really hard to think outside of that. So for today, I want us to really take a second to try to get outside of that box of the way we've been taught that voting is supposed to be. And we're just going to start from scratch, whether that be rewriting the Constitution, founding your own nation, however you want to think about it. I want us to start from scratch and answer the question, who gets to vote in this new country that we're founding? So there's a couple basic things we're going to have to consider. We're going to have to talk about demographics, right? Is there going to be an age limit on voting? Can 11-year-olds vote in our country? Can 105-year-olds vote in our country? Those conversations have happened since this country was founded. Um, Historically, there have been a lot of demographic requirements on voting beyond just age, right? We've discriminated voting rights based on race, based on sex. So we're going to have to establish some rules. And if we're not going to use some of the rules this country's tried out in the past, we need to be able to articulate why that's a bad idea. There are other requirements we could consider. Is there going to be a literacy requirement to vote? Are you allowed to vote if you can't read? Are you allowed to vote if you don't speak English? Are there going to be educational requirements to vote? Are there going to be financial requirements? Are you going to have to pay taxes in order to vote? These are all discussions that happen all the time. They're discussions that have happened since this country was founded. So that's something that we're going to have to think about. The second question we need to answer, once we've established who gets to vote, is we need to establish what the rules are for the actual voting process. So beyond who's eligible, we have to answer questions like, how do you prove who you are when you go to vote? What's the level of intensity we want to have when we make sure people really are who they say they are? Do you sign a piece of paper? Do you show a photo ID? Do you use your social security number? Do you just trust that they're telling the truth? So what level of proof should your citizens have to give the government in order to participate? We'll have to talk about enforcement. What are the laws or what are the penalties for cheating on election day? If you try to vote twice and you get caught, what happens? Or are you just allowed to vote twice? If your mom is in the hospital, can you vote for her? And if not, what's the penalty for doing that? These are all things we got to think about. And then finally, we got to talk about how the elections themselves will work. How do you vote? Do you post a video on YouTube of you saying, I vote for so-and-so? Do you text it in? Do you use a paper ballot? Do you vote by mail? Do you vote on your phone? Lots of options. So again, I would encourage you to take about 10 minutes. I'm not going to know because I'm ending this video right now, but I would encourage you to take about 10 minutes, write down some thoughts about those two questions. Most importantly, who gets to vote? You don't have to get super specific, but write down some basic criteria that come to mind. Age, anything about education or literacy, criminal history. Write down some things that are requirements for you. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe anybody who wants to vote can vote. That's fine. But take a few minutes and write about that. And then with any additional time that you have, write down some of the basic rules. What methods are available to vote? Should you have to prove who you are? Do you need to get fingerprinted to vote? Do you need an ID to vote? And then think about how seriously you want to enforce those rules. So take about 10 minutes, jot down some basic ideas, and then I will see you in the next video. Thanks.